All right, guys, it's another great episode of PFREI. I'm your host, Fuquan Bilal. We're back again with another great show. Today we have an attorney in the house. This is probably the third attorney I think we had on the show, maybe the second, I think, Bill. Uh, I've been really trying to bring you guys to the platform to kind of, help real estate investors, just everyday people in general, with some of the services you do other than real estate stuff, things that I think that are important. So we'll get into the show. We'll talk about that. But I have William Dolan, Dolan Law LLC. I'll let you talk about your background and some of the things that you specialize in, and then we'll jump right into it. We talked about real estate earlier. You told me you used to have some real estate stuff, so you understand the concept of that. But just give everybody a background, give the listeners, little flavor of the service you provide and who you are as a person.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, Fuquan, thanks for having me. It's good to see you. It's been quite a while. I when I first started practicing law, I started at a big corporate firm, working with people who were writing the LLC acts and the corporate acts and kind of cutting my teeth on those kind of things. But a few years after that, I decided to start my own firm where I could work more hands-on with real estate investors and smaller direct business owners because law was a second career for me. So before I was a practicing lawyer, I owned several businesses. I owned a couple of mortgage companies, a title company, and I was a real estate investor myself. Not full time. I probably did about 50 deals,
Mhm.
mostly flips, had quite a few rentals for a while, 10, 12, that's quite a few to me to manage. And I did a couple of development projects too, bought some lots at the beach, built some houses on them and resold them.
Okay, so you got
So
some real experience.
yeah, I mean, and I enjoyed it, and really everything I did sort of revolved around real estate. I mean, I had a couple of other little entrepreneurial things I helped people out with, but the mortgage business revolves around real estate, title work revolves around real estate, of course, real estate investing. So, when I was working at that big firm, we did some big real estate deals. We were doing loans that were secured by uh, big hotel chains, the Plaza in New York and all of that. But man, it was, these deals were just monsters. It didn't feel like you were really doing a real estate deal. You were, one little piece of it was like 300 pages long. Real estate felt pretty, far removed from that. So when I started my practice, I wanted to deal more with real estate investors and lenders and, people that were right there on the front lines, like I used to be doing deals. But I was also able to bring some of the bigger corporate experience too. So a lot of my clients have either grown or they're sort of like mid-sized real estate investors where it gets a little more complicated. Maybe they're raising money or they've got a lot of different entities. Maybe they want to do some estate planning. Privacy is a concern. That allows me to bring what I learned from the big corporate firm into the mix too.
Yeah, I think that's important. You do a variety of things, and that's kind of what I like about your shop because you have an understanding of real estate. So when you have these type of investors come to you to be set up, for certain things, it's important, and you're very knowledgeable too of certain things. When it comes to mortgages and structuring deals and stuff like that. So that real estate experience do kick in mixed with the legal aspect of it. I can see you have the double advantage.
Yeah, yeah. And even now, so my practice is, I would say probably about 45% like straight on real estate deals, about 45% sort of like corporate work. And a lot of that's, forming LLCs and partnerships to do real estate deals, but it's really focused more on kind of the corporate side. And then about 10% of my practice is drafting loan documents and doing lender rep on real estate deals mainly. It's doing title commitments, drafting notes and guarantees and mortgages and assignment of rents and those kind of documents. So even today, uh, out of all that, probably easily 70 to 80% of what I do touches real estate.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the trust aspect of it, which you do on that side of the business. In a certain, I don't want to call them products, but services actually that you offer on that side of the thing, helping people get set up with the family trust and um, basically, what comes along with that as well.
Yeah, so one of the questions we get all the time when someone has LLCs or corporations is, what happens if I die, or I become disabled or whatever the case is. We'll focus on death here for the moment. What happens if I become deceased? Where does all these, where do all these LLCs go? Who gets them? How do they get there? Does it go through probate? And all these kinds of questions. And there's nothing better for estate planning than a trust. I mean, that's really what trusts were originally designed for. They were actually, think back to the Magna Carta days, you had landowners that would go out and fight the Crusades, and that's kind of the time period when trust started, and they would leave someone in charge of their estate. And that's where the first trust was created. Lord so and so went off to fight in the Crusades and left somebody back at home in charge of everything and entrusted that person with the responsibility to care for his affairs. And that's really what it is. So you can start with like a living trust, revocable trust while you're alive. You can create a trust where you're the trustee, you control everything, you're the primary beneficiary. But if you become deceased without anything going through probate and that whole messy, complicated process, you can automatically have beneficiaries set up, whether it's a spouse, your kids, whoever, you have your chain of trustees, those successors are built into the trust agreement as well. And none of this doesn't need to go through a court. It doesn't need to go through the probate. It's easier, it's simpler, it's quicker. And that you can't do that with an LLC. An LLC doesn't have succession concepts built into it. That's where there's the trust. You kind of marry the trust and the LLC together, or you can use it with a corporation or any other kind of asset to give you that ability to control your assets. And
yeah, I mean, it's definitely the right thing to do, but when you get down to behind the scenes now, putting it together, it really makes you think of who you're going to bestow that trust in. And I think that just drags the process out forever because you come to realization like, holy crap, like you're thinking about afterlife now and how that's going to play out and who can you trust to do that. And most of the time you find it's not even your own family who, I'm pretty sure on the other side, you probably see a lot of that. People find someone who they can depend on. So yeah, that's great. I think everybody should definitely have that set up if you're not even in a real estate business or an investor. I think this is something basic that everybody should have, but I don't think a lot of people really focus on this. I mean, is people banging down your door to get these set up and, you know, working on this type of stuff or more transactions?
Yeah, they don't. And it's funny to hear you say, once you have to start think about these issues, it does slow people down. And I joke around with clients all the time. When people want to start a business and form an LLC, that tends to happen very quickly. When someone wants to do a trust or a will or a durable power of attorney or an advanced healthcare directive, it takes a really long time. And I've had so many people, no, but I'm going to be the exception. You're going to send me those documents, those questions. I'm going to fill those things out. I'll have it to you by the end of the weekend. Here we are like a month or 2 months later. I'm like, hey, you're still working on that form? And they're like, oh, man, like
it makes them think. Yeah.
It does. It's tough. It's tough. My wife and I went through the same thing when we were doing it for ourselves. It's tough for all of us. If you have kids, if something happens to you and your kids are still minors, who do you want to be the guardian for your kids? That's the deep question. And if that person's unwilling or unavailable or whatever the case is at the time, who do you want to be the next person in line?
Yeah.
Tough question.
Yeah. I know you do some stuff with the banks also, with the lender docs and stuff like that. You help private lenders. You want to talk about that a little bit, how you make sure they have the right documents and everything in place. Even you represent some banks doing commercial loans too, right?
Yeah. So I do a little bit of work for some commercial kind of traditional licensed commercial lenders, but most of what I do is for private lenders. And it's interesting because a lot of them, it takes a little while to learn where does the underwriting end in the legal process start. Like as a lender, they're going to underwrite their own deals. They need to make sure that they think the values in the real estate, they need to make sure the numbers work. But on the legal side, a lot of times it's, hey, we'd like to find a way to make this deal work, but we need to make sure we're secured. How do we do that? That's usually the main question, aside from kind of the easy one, like what's the interest rate? Of course, you got to have a note that says what the interest rate is and the points and the payments and that kind of stuff. But it's really the collaterals where the action is. And people come
Yeah.
all the time and say, well, how do we know we're going to get a first mortgage? How do we know? Maybe are we going to be in second position? Sometimes you can't do a mortgage because the existing first lender won't allow it. And then we have to try and get more creative and say, well, okay, can they pledge their LLC interest in the LLC that owns the real estate? Can we get some collateral there at that level? And so on the front end, there's always a discussion and an analysis around, what collateral is available, and what can we target? And then after that, we have to make sure that it's what the borrower thinks it is, right? If it's a first lien position or a second lien position, we'll generally require that a title company get involved and do a title search. If it's a big
Mhm.
enough loan, we'll generally require title insurance to assist with that too. But but I review the title commitments and make sure, look at the exceptions and the exclusions and those things to make sure that they're right. Draft the promissory note, any personal guarantees, mortgage, assignment of rents, those types of things. But there are other issues that creep up too, like usury, and that's something that the usury laws vary state by state. For anyone who doesn't know, usury is that all states have laws that say if you charge an interest rate in excess of X, then that's a violation of the law. And in most states, there's pretty stiff penalties. Some states, it's criminal. Some states, it's just civil, and there's just a really hefty um, penalty for charging above usury. So knowing how to navigate the usury laws is really important too. And lenders don't really know that. They just, and this is what they should focus on. They should focus on make the business deal work. And then you come to someone like me, and we're supposed to make sure you're going to get the collateral, make sure you're not going to violate the law, and sometimes it causes us to have to massage the deal a little bit.
Yeah.
But they
Yeah.
could come back and say, well, this just about works, but we kind of just need to tweak this piece here or that piece there, so that it actually, works within the framework of the law or works within the framework of, how we can secure the collateral or, whatever the issue is. But there's generally more involved in it than people think. I think because these deals happen all the time, there tends to be a feeling of like, oh, well, since it happens so often, it must be easy. You know, just because something happens a lot doesn't mean it's easy to do. There's a lot of moving pieces to it.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
look, there's a huge market for private lending because banks these days are conservative. I mean, it is hard because I represent quite a few business owners too, and they get SBA loans and other commercial loans. And I mean, they'll ask for everything but your firstborn. And they're
Yeah.
like 6 months, 9 months. I mean, it just takes so long. It's crazy. And a private lender, I got two requests a couple of days ago, and we're going to fund several $1 million worth of these loans in the next couple of days. I mean, you're talking like a week's period of time. That's not ideal, right? But private lenders in certain situations can move that quickly depending on the circumstances. And you're going to pay for it, right? You're going to pay a higher rate, probably some higher fees to do that. But if it's a business deal, it's all dollars and cents. If it's in this deal I'm talking about, they're buying some properties out of a bankruptcy sale. Time is important, but if you don't close on time, you're not going to get the deals.
So
And
they're utilizing you to do the lender docs and package it together to secure them and make sure they're good, and then they'll fund the transaction. So you pretty much do that part of it. You do that nationwide, or are you only doing that in the states where you are?
no, I do that. Yeah, I do that across the country. So we'll make obviously I'm actually licensed in Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, but most of the loan documents I make governed by Delaware law because Delaware is favorable in certain aspects. So we make the note, the guarantee, and quite a few of the other documents based on Delaware law. If there's a mortgage or deed of trust, that's obviously going to be governed by the state in which the property is located. So sometimes we have to bring in local counsel to draft like a deed of trust or something to do one part of the deal.
Got
And of
it.
course, a lot of my clients, most of them have Delaware LLCs. So there's that kind of Delaware tie-in too. Yeah, we do loans, loan docs for people. We just did one in Florida. The one I'm talking about now is in Ohio, within Georgia, California, Illinois. I mean,
Got
all
it. Yeah, I had a question on fractionalized mortgages. Is that something you're familiar with?
yeah, I mean, if you're using it in the context which I think you are, then yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of deal structure, right? I always try to figure out how to make this deal work. So I'm gonna run a scenario to you. You throw your legal hat on real quick. You tell me.
Okay.
All right. I have a deal, and I have let's say three people, more than two, keyword, that I want to try to create a scenario and do a fractionalized mortgage. I want to, I guess, give them all equal share of the deal, and they be under an LLC, I'm guessing, and they all fund the LLC, which then funds the investor for the loan and the property. That's my thought of a fractionalized mortgage. What I hear is, okay, it's more than two people, SEC alert, SEC alert. That should be in a fund, or that should be in a syndication or something like that. But I heard something about this fractionalized mortgage piece that can be used in that format. I didn't know, just trying to get clarity on that. So
Yeah,
legal hat, what do you have to
yeah,
say?
sure. Yeah, I love it. Hit me with it. So there are securities laws that when someone is investing money in essentially, I'm just going to kind of distill it down to simple jargon, right? So if you're making like a passive investment, then the party who's raising the money is subject to securities laws, which says that either the security has to be registered with the SEC, or that you have to use one of the exemptions to registration. And then you got to follow those kind of convoluted rules, which still a lot of times require you to provide a PPM or an OM or and discharge all these obligations. Usually we try to structure around that for a transaction like what you're talking about. It's different if someone's going to raise 10, 20, $30 million and they're going to be cycling through the money. That's probably more of like a fund. You probably do need to consider that a security. You do need to have a PPM and all that stuff. But for like what you're talking about, if it's like a single deal, let's say, there's a few different ways you could do it. You could have an LLC formed and they could contribute the money to the LLC, and that LLC could be the lender on that deal. Or they could each have a separate direct note to the borrower, and those notes could all be secured by the same mortgage document, pari passu, or with equal dignity. And we do that all the time. So, and in
See,
that,
I get excited for stuff like this. I get excited for the out of the box stuff. Go ahead, preach.
yeah. And so, I mean, this happens all the time. When they're a direct lender, it's not a security. They're not a passive investor. They're a lender at that point. So the securities laws are not going to be an issue in that situation. And you can do creative things with it. Under the mortgage, they can all be equal. They can, you could actually have different priorities too. You could have, two of them be sort of equal in first position and a third note be subordinate to those. And we can describe all that. It takes a little bit of special language, but it's not that complicated.
So all of this is happening inside of the first mortgage that's being created
Right.
as a fractionalized, I guess, fractionalized mortgage where people have, whatever position they have in that vehicle, which is funding the LLC, which is funding the lender. Interesting. A small transaction, $1 million, $500,000, something like that. Would that be commonly used for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have quite a few private lenders that they have what they call funders that want to kind of like fund the deals, and a lot of times that structure is used to do that. And uh, it it's good because you can avoid those security issues, right? The securities issues. You don't have to go through those complicated processes. I mean, theoretically, And I do have some lenders that do this too. Sometimes, but this is only usually when there's like a conduit lender, when there's sort of like almost like investors in the lender. They'll have that party loan money to the lender, and the lender turns around and lends it back out to the borrower. But that's a little bit different than the situation you described, where there's three people that can all be direct lenders. So the one thing I'll add to that though is when you have that situation where you have three note holders secured by the same mortgage, you want to have somebody as the nominee. Somebody, because you have three people, how do you decide when it's time to foreclose if that happens, right? Somebody's got to make that decision. You don't want there to be an argument. Well, one person doesn't want to do it, two people do, so there's majority rule. How does that work? So we would typically have a nominee, and
Okay.
usually that's one of the three will sort of play the lead in that. I mean, it doesn't have to work that way. You could have like an inter-creditor agreement, which we do that sometimes too, where there's like kind of a side agreement where they decide how they're going to make those decisions. Is it going to be a vote? Is it going to be based on outstanding, who has the most outstanding, principal and interest at that moment in time? What's going to be the mechanism to drive that? Because the lawyer, we're always thinking about that. We don't want there to be a deadlock and then
Yeah. Yeah.
everything's frozen because there's this disagreement and the documents don't solve the disagreement.
Yeah, this is good stuff. I really appreciate it, man. Let me plug your YouTube also. I saw you started doing videos. I catch your videos. I think they're great. Keep them coming. Keep them
Oh man,
coming. You're not doing enough. You got to do 10 a week.
oh man, I wish
No,
I
I love it though. I love it. It's educational. I'm glad you did it. I don't know if it was the pandemic that forced your hand and had you start doing it, but I'm glad you launched it. And you guys should go check out his YouTube channel. You want to plug your YouTube real quick?
Yeah. It's called Esquire Advice. So Esquire Advice. You can just type that into YouTube. Come up. We have quite a few videos. You talk about what motivated me to do it. I was actually thinking about doing it before the pandemic because I feel like there's so much foundational information that a lot of times I either don't have time to give to clients or they don't know that they need it, so they don't really want to pay me for it, right? So in either of those situations, I was like, there's got to be another way for me to deliver this information to kind of get the client to where the client needs to be for us to then, move forward and get their deals done. And so I was like, let me come up with these videos where I can give them that foundational information. I give them the baseline so that I know they're at like a good place to actually get into the meat of the deal. And we're not spinning our wheels explaining really like what's to me rudimentary concepts, but I know that's not always the case to other people. Sometimes people hear all these legal concepts and jargon
Yeah.
and they're like, whoa, wait, what does that mean? But yeah, so those videos, and I use them in my practice all the time. Like people will say, well, why should I use a Delaware LLC? It's like, if I don't have time to sit and explain it, it's like, hey, I happen to have a video on that. Why don't you listen to that? Or, how do I maximize my LLC? You know
You know what
what?
I imagine? You
I'll
having
email
like you having like a screen where somebody asks a question, you just push a button and the video goes out to them.
I would answer that, but I don't need to because I can click this button. Here you go. But
All right, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Dolan Law LLC, William Dolan, thank you so much for sharing us information. We got a jewel from you. PFREI, another great episode. I'm your host, Fupan Bilal. Go check out his YouTube channel. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and all the other couple of hundred social media channels that we on. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you tuning in.